Like the office they commemorate, presidential libraries are living institutions. Certainly it is my hope that the Reagan Library will become a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars interpret the past and policymakers debate the future.
Welcome to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute's virtual event series. To fulfill President Reagan's mission of making the Reagan Library a dynamic intellectual forum, our Center for Public Affairs Programming offers lectures and forums presenting perspectives on important public policy issues of the day. Each year, we bring you 20 to 30 events from politicians, authors, members of the media, business and military leaders, and more. Since the March 2020 closure of many businesses across our great country, the Reagan Foundation is now bringing its events online to ensure that we are still delivering world-class content, even if you can't get to our hilltop to watch it in person. In this week's Center for Public Affairs virtual event, we bring you Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger. Mr. Pottinger served as the Senior Director for Asia since the start of the Trump administration in January 2017. In that role, he advised the President on Northeast and Southeast Asia and coordinated U.S. policy for the region. Mr. Pottinger lived and worked in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China from 1997 to 2005, reporting for Reuters and the Wall Street Journal. He then joined the U.S. Marines at age 32 with active duty in Japan and 3 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, followed by reserve duty at the Pentagon and the Defense Intelligence Agency. In a 2005 essay in the Wall Street Journal about his career change from journalism to the military, he said, "Living in China shows you what a non-democratic country can do to its citizens. I'm not an uncritical rah-rah American. Living abroad has sharpened my view of what's wrong with my country too. It's obvious that we need to reinvent ourselves in various ways, but we should also be allowed to do it from within, not according to someone else's dictates." During today's conversation, Mr. Pottinger discusses the increasingly tense U.S.-China relationship. We now invite you to enjoy our virtual program with Deputy National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger and Reagan Institute Director Roger Zakheim.
Deputy National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger, thank you for joining the show.
Roger, thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Well, it's great to have this conversation with you, and I'm coming to you from the Reagan Institute offices, literally across the park from you. You're sitting inside the old executive office building. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep. I'm over here in one of our conference rooms.
So perhaps not too long a distance between us, but the security barrier is quite significant. So I'm waving to you. You can't see me from here. Before we jump into the area where you have just tremendous expertise, which is obviously across the national security portfolio, but particularly China, most people are not familiar with your background, which I just think is really unique. You lived in China for some time, reporting for the Wall Street Journal, and then at the ripe age of 31 years old, I believe, you made a turn and became a Marine. Tell us about that switch, and was life really tough as a journal reporter?
Yeah, exactly. I needed more danger in my life, I guess. I guess the context of that time, I'd been working as a reporter in China for 7 years or so, and China was on this rapid economic ascent that was made possible by its 2001 entry into the World Trade Organization, and by 2004, I think I had sort of a sense of unease that China was not really going to converge with the more liberal order in the way that we hoped it might, and rather that the party was biding its time, in the famous phrase by Deng Xiaoping, hiding and biding, until it was powerful enough to be able to influence the world on its own terms, on the terms of the ruling party there. And I guess the other bit of context was the war in Iraq, which after the initial success of the invasion, the first phase of the operation, 2003. By 2004, you had the 2 battles of Fallujah. I was watching all this unfold out of the corner of my eye from a distant location in China, but I was a bit troubled that we had misjudged as a nation, the administration, the Congress, to a great extent, the press as well, had misjudged the nature of the conflict that we had ended up in. And I guess that those events, China's rise, the Iraq War, had created, a sense of awareness in me that our form of government is not inevitable, and that it shouldn't be taken for granted, but that it's a form of government very much worth fighting for. And I was sort of in that liminal state of mind when I attended a lunch in New York City in late 2004, and I happened to be seated next to an active duty Marine Colonel, Ron Bailey, and he literally recruited me into the Marine Corps over that lunch.
Wow, those people who do seating at the Council of Foreign Relations. I mean, you got to watch out.
Yeah, it's true. No, it changed the course of my life.
Clearly, and the country is better for it. Obviously, all that training in Mandarin really helped you in Anbar province in Iraq. Yeah, I'm sure. But one thing you wrote in your 2005 piece, published in the Wall Street Journal, explaining you were about to enter the Marine Corps, was kind of the appreciation for the United States was something you felt more deeply about and had a perspective on that you could not have possibly had you not lived in China and Beijing for all those years. Expand on that for a second.
Yeah, I think that there's an advantage to viewing your home country from abroad, and especially from within a very different kind of system that was for all of the successes that China's had in this that interregnum period between the totalitarian years of Mao Zedong and now the new totalitarian direction that the current leadership has taken it in. I was there in that interregnum when there was a real moment of optimism about China and its future, and you got to see what the Chinese people themselves were capable of and what their aspirations were. And it was a heady time. It was a fun time to be there. But lurking in the background always was this sense of menace. I covered a broad range of stories that sometimes brought me up close and personal to the uglier side of that system. And the first SARS epidemic was one of those times. Also, just the vast corruption of the ruling party and how that crushed the aspirations of people further down the ladder, particularly farmers, but other people as well. That gave me perspective on, I remember reading a lot about U.S. history later on in my time living in China, and I found great comfort and solace in sort of reading U.S. histories, especially revolutionary history and up through the 19th century.
So, so you're living there, and gets you you're appreciating the differences between the society you're seeing in China, thinking more critically about U.S. and the U.S. history and a deeper appreciation there. One thing you referenced in that journal piece in 2005, 15 years ago, it doesn't feel like so long ago, 2005, but I suppose it is you talk about a number of episodes where you really encountered the reach of the state and its interference in liberty, fundamentally, and in freedom of the press. One that just got me was you were punched in the face in a Beijing Starbucks. And I just think the convergence of being attacked by a communist goon in a Starbucks, really, the tension of China during that period really just plays out with that headline. Just give us a little more context for what happened and kind of the takeaway lesson.
Oh, that was an episode where I had been approached by a whistleblower in their system, a guy who had been an engineer who was aware of gross pollution of a river out in the far west of China that had led to a lot of people getting sick, including he and members of his family. But the mine had been a uranium mine that had been contributing to China's military programs, but then got shuttered. And then there was sort of a corrupt deal that the thing reopened locally by local authorities to try to sell yellow cake outside of China's borders. And so he came with this whole story. I was meeting with him when I got approached, standing in line to get coffee for myself and to get him a cup of tea. And I was holding these two.
Do you want a latte with that punch? I mean, is that essentially what was offered to you?
Yeah, you're right, exactly. And it was as I was holding these, the guy who'd been sort of hovering over me, behind me, punched me and said, said in English, not bad English. He said, "You need to leave China now. You need wow. to leave." I was so stunned. I was still holding the. It wasn't much of a.
Don't drop the $5 latte.
No, exactly. I was still holding them even after I'd been hit, and I didn't really know what had happened until the guy that I was meeting with, who witnessed the whole thing, was shaking. He was trembling uncontrollably, and he said, "That guy's been following me for the last 3 weeks." And so we knew we had some problems.
and therein lies, I mean, the tensions between the Starbucks, the opening up to the West, but that economic liberalization does not necessarily translate, right, as we've seen, and perhaps it wasn't as convincing or as known then to the political liberalization. But also in there, Matt, is this kind of contrast between the people and the party. And I know that's something that you focused on. We're going to get to a very important speech that you made in May of this year, but maybe even to take it further back, thinking about President Reagan, because I know that has influenced your outlook in terms of systems of government, competition, confrontation, words we use about China now. You and National Security Advisor, Ambassador Robert O'Brien also kind of take this outlook and look back in some respects to how President Reagan approached similar things that rhymed when it was the Soviet Union. But how about you just take a couple minutes on that and see if I made the right connection or taken a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. One of the fun things about working at the White House has been some of the relationships I've struck up with veterans of the Reagan administration, and that introduced me to writing of other veterans, some still living, some who passed away. But I got to know and befriend Reagan's chief speechwriter, Tony Dolan, who wrote speeches for President Reagan through the entirety of his time in office. And early in the administration, I was really lucky to have been introduced to some of the key speeches that Reagan gave, and the Westminster speech. In fact, I think the two most critical speeches in some respects, the two that I think have had certainly an influence on me, but also I think there's an instinctive affinity between the approach outlined in the speeches that Reagan gave first at Westminster, and then the bookend at near the end of his administration in Guildhall when he was back. So, I mean, just to give you a little bit of the context of these speeches, Reagan's first major trip abroad.
In 1982, right? He's there in the Houses of Parliament.
You got it. He actually hadn't traveled really. He might have done a short trip to Mexico or something.
Canada, sure, I believe, yeah.
Canada. But we're a couple of years in before he makes a major trip, and in that speech he lays out a strong defense of the West and of Western values at a time when we were going through one of these episodic, as we are now, periods of self-doubt or even self-loathing about democracy and about the triumph of free and open societies. And in this speech, he gives this robust defense of them, and also lays out in stunning lines, confrontational language about, I would at least say very candid language about the shortcomings of the Soviets and the Soviet system and of Marxism.
The ash heap of history, I think,
ash heap of history was in that speech,
yes.
But so was I have my old annotated copy of it.
Oh yeah, we got to see the one, all crumpled up there, dog-eared and all.
This is the one I read in early 2017 when we were preparing for President Trump's trip to Asia, where, by the way, President Trump gave a speech at the National Assembly in Seoul,
right.
Which reminds me a lot of Reagan's Westminster speech.
Right, and at the time you were kind of the senior director for Asia at the time, and right, so
that's right.
You would have been working kind of all those issues,
absolutely,
China and everything else included.
Yep. It was a 2-week trip to Asia. It was the longest trip to Asia by a U.S. president in a quarter of a century. It was an intense period, but you had this interesting thing where you had the ash heap of history. You had Reagan saying that freedom mustn't wither in a quiet, deadening accommodation with totalitarian evil. And all these lines that a lot of people found embarrassing at the time. They were really cringing at the idea that we would be so confrontational, so candid. But what this speech did, and then the Guildhall bookend later on, was match confrontation with conciliation, candor with diplomacy. And so he keeps oscillating back and forth between these two approaches, where he you can go from ash heap of history to quote, "We invite the Soviet Union to consider with us how the competition of ideas and values, which it is committed to support, can be conducted in a peaceful and reciprocal basis. I'm prepared to offer President Brezhnev an opportunity to speak to the American people on our television if he will allow me the same opportunity with the Soviet people." So you have this oscillation between confrontation and candor on the one hand, and conciliation and diplomacy on the other.
Let's drill down that a little bit more, because in addition to the Reagan Institute launching a major policy working group where we were asking the question, what would a Westminster speech look like for 21st century, right? And you shared that, President Trump's speech in 2017, would have those elements. You also have kind of how Reagan's sophistication there, where what he was trying to do was get to speak to the Soviets, this people, not just the Politburo, right? There was an element there, and also the universalism there, which makes some Americans uncomfortable, but was without question kind of a hallmark of President Reagan's outlook, where this isn't something, as he says in that speech, I believe someplace, not for the chosen few, but freedom and democracy is for everyone. Again, those ideas would have been, of course, anathema, and Brezhnev certainly would never have allowed that to be spoken to the Soviet Union, to people there. Though years later, when it was Gorbachev, he did have that opportunity at the Moscow State University speech.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so the dynamic is similar today, right? I mean, the May 4th speech that I gave was an attempt to communicate directly with Chinese people, and it worked for about 48 hours, and then the censors really took out their entire arsenal to try to.
Let's step back and talk about that for a second, because that was really a remarkable speech you gave. It was on May 4th of this year, where you spoke from someplace in the White House property, I don't know, the old executive office building or inside the White House itself, but you addressed the Chinese people in Mandarin. And the most senior official from the United States to speak in Mandarin, I believe, ever, maybe I didn't get that right, but certainly one of the most senior U.S. officials to speak in Mandarin. And my takeaway from it, Matt, but feel free to correct me or expand on it, was what you essentially shared was that there was something called the May 4th movement, which was China's democracy movement. And you explain the history. You're explaining, here we have the Deputy National Security Advisor in the United States, explaining to those in China who could listen, I guess for 48 hours, they were able to, how the UN Declaration of Human Rights, amongst other things, was actually kind of had Chinese authors, and that democracy and freedom have their roots not exclusively in the West, but within China and amongst Chinese intellectuals. I mean, did I get that right? Was that the essence of what you were conveying?
Yeah, I mean, when I had gotten sort of the party sterilized version of May 4th history when I was living in China, and learn more about it from Western sources who were drawing on primary Chinese sources from that period 101 years ago. And it was such a pivotal moment in their history, and it struck me that the period we're in right now is so much more closed in China. It is so much less tolerant of debate and expression and intellectual ferment than where China was 101 years ago at the moment when this May 4th movement kicked off, that era, that sort of Renaissance era. And it could have gone in any of a number of directions, right? It ended up ultimately being co-opted in no small part because of World War II, the Japanese invasion of China. It ended up getting co-opted by the Communist Party and sort of curated. They carefully curated that history to support, a narrative that.
So they have the revisionist interpretation of May 4th, and what you've done is in your speech was actually explaining, a revision to their revisionism, right?
I thought the fun of it was simply drawing on some of the heroes of that period that have been carefully expunged, airbrushed out of mainland Chinese history, and Hu Shi and also P.C. Chang. Hu Shi was this towering intellect, one of my favorite thinkers of all time, who had spent some time in the United States he was a brilliant student. He was at Cornell and then at Columbia studying with John Dewey, and his approach was one of not allowing the nation to be seduced by any particular ideology or whatever the fashionable ism, as he put it, was of the moment, but to think in terms of highly pragmatic terms. How do you solve problems? How do you assess and gather data and weigh the data and then tackle problems in a very pragmatic kind of way? And one of the things that he tackled early on was the question of literacy in China. And he at the time, to be literate in China, for the most part, meant that you had to be literate in what was kind of the equivalent of Latin. It was a classical language that was not what you would speak, and it was not a colloquial language. He did this whole movement. He called it the Baihua Yundong, which meant like the plain speech movement. How to make colloquial language that people actually speak be the language that people write in.
It was the democratizing of literacy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really essentially what he was doing.
And he was overcoming massive institutional pushback to that concept. A lot of his fellow intellectuals thought that this was a crazy idea, dangerous idea. But ultimately he and others, of course, succeeded in this. So I keep his photo, an old portrait of him nearby.
So I mean, just amazing. I encourage our viewers and listeners to watch you deliver the speech in Mandarin with the English subtitles, because it's just a remarkable thing to see someone within the National Security Council in your position, communicating that way. I mean, it's President Reagan. We were talking about this in 1980. Ford took a trip to China. And not only did he give a speech where he addressed the Chinese Communist Party Politburo, but he did what I think you were trying to do, which was speak to the Chinese people. In his case, he gave a speech at Fudan, one of the more prestigious universities in Shanghai, and his message was quite clear. I'm sure it was viewed as subversive at the same time, but he chose to try to explain the American system of government. And he said, in America, the people rule, not the party, was the obvious implication of his remarks. Matt, when you gave that speech, tell us about the reaction. Obviously, you shared that within 48 hours. If you were in China, you would not be able to see it or view it. Did it reach activists? Was this just written off as subversive? Tell me about the impact, both intended and what the outcome was.
Yeah, it was interesting. We just put it out there. We just published it. It was a speech delivered on a Zoom call with the University of Virginia Miller Center, and there were people who dialed in from China for the live presentation of the speech, and then the video clip of it was getting passed around. We determined that there were well over 1 million views, more than 80% of which were coming from the Chinese-speaking world in Asia. So we were able to determine that there was a lot of, and the thing got mirror imaged on other little sites and so forth. So we did a little inventory of some of those other sites, and I got a lot of direct feedback, especially at the outset. I was having some people that I knew from long ago in China, others who I didn't know, who were writing mostly very positive feedback about it. After about 36 to 48 hours, I think the Communist Party apparatus decided that they couldn't let this thing.
Professor Pottinger's history lesson was no longer welcome.
Yeah. So it was interesting. There were a couple of articles that came out right away that were actually complimentary by op-eds, and then those things got erased. And they did a nightly news broadcast on Chinese Central Television, to half their country, attacking me, not the speech, because I don't think they wanted to actually.
So what was the line of
attack?
Attack?
Some of the arguments that were in the speech. So it was
character assassination. They were unhappy with your kind of pronunciation. Your accent in Mandarin was Western. What were they going after you?
Oh, it was just some name calling. It's good old Marxist tactics. You ad hominem attack. Someone set up a fake Twitter profile in Chinese of me as well, which appears to have been a part of a United Front effort as well. But yeah, so it got pretty well scrubbed from the web. But in those first days, it seemed to really catch fire.
So I want to kind of talk about a couple of things that came up here, because the speech really suggests, hey, we're in this. The ideological differences matter in this competition with China. I mean, you've been in the National Security Council when the Trump administration issued its national security strategy. It focused on China, said that is the near peer competitor. That competition extends not only from a military security plane, economic, but also on this ideological plane. How are we doing? I mean, your speech is in my mind the high watermark of trying to pierce through the party, pierce through the politicization of kind of the competition, and simply talk to the Chinese people. Are we doing enough of that? Is that something we're going to do more of? You'd like to do more of?
Yeah, well, I mean. Like in the spirit of the Fudan University speech that Reagan gave, like you mentioned, and his speech in Moscow as well, an attempt to address the Chinese people directly is the long-standing motif in the long history, 240 years of U.S.-China relations. the effort to reach the people directly for business or to proselytize or to bring back ideas to have people-to-people exchanges. I think that is the foundation for all that can be good and that is good in the U.S.-China relationship. The party has a very clear and powerful interest in not allowing those exchanges to take place without very careful supervision and control by the party. And that's why you see such a massive increase in emphasis and investment in United Front Department activities. The United Front is sort of the Chinese Communist Party influence activities. It refers to efforts that are not just traditional government diplomacy, but more covert, sometimes corrupt and coercive, some of it more above board. But it's that whole wide range of activities that are designed to shape the outside world to conform with views that the party want us to hold and the types of policies the party would want us to pursue toward China to keep the party in power as long as possible.
Yeah, so let's take a couple more minutes on that, and then we'll close this out with our lightning round, knowing that you have lots of other things, pressing work to do to get to. But you talk about the Chinese Communist Party and how they want to prioritize and kind of set the terms for the exchange of ideas, of commerce, of how basically the kind of the world order through that. That of course presents challenge and threats to us. I think a lot of Americans, whether aren't aware that Facebook and other social media platforms are not allowed or are banned from China, and probably don't understand why the United States and people sitting where you sit are concerned about Chinese social media platforms and other forms of technology that could collect data on U.S. citizens and send it back to China are a real national security threat. Take just a minute and explain why we have to be concerned. Why is it that we actually have to put up barriers for what comes into this country from China? Not the shirt that's manufactured in China per se, but certainly the technology would be the concern.
Yeah, sure. So the reason this administration has taken such has put so much emphasis on both the Chinese equipment, like Huawei equipment into our 5G networks, as well as the software, the apps like WeChat. The reason that we view those with suspicion, really beyond suspicion to alarm, is that they are designed as systems that can harvest the most intimate data about all of the populations that they touch, not just China's domestic population, but the population overseas. It's the reason why the Chinese Communist Party has put so much money and effort and diplomacy and sweat into subsidizing these systems to get them to make them prevalent. Once those things are embedded, whether it's WeChat on your phone or it's Huawei gear in your 5G kit that all of your communications are riding on, you've opened up the ability for the party to harvest all that intimate data. And at the end of the day, what is that data? What is the data? It's our thoughts, right? It's all of our activities. The digital exhaust that we exude each day is everything from our who we affiliate with, what we read, what we communicate, what we talk about, what research we're doing, what intellectual property we're developing from our sweat and creativity. What secrets we need to guard, whether we're companies or the U.S. government. It is our sovereignty. It's our personal sovereignty. It's our national.
So sovereignty. What it has impacts economically, obviously from a security standpoint, politically, and you use that word sovereignty. It truly challenges and undermines it. That's the perspective you're taking if we allow all that data
well, these
to
are things that
migrate outside the country.
We would never allow the U.S. We have a constitutional protection against our own government from accessing our personal letters and our personal thoughts and communications and so forth. What we're doing, though, is opening it up for a hostile dictatorship with a totalitarian vision to have access to even more intimate data than one could have ever possibly imagined at the time the framers of our Constitution, wrote the Fourth Amendment and so forth. So I'll give you an example. There was you may have seen the news stories from a week ago that popped up all over the world about a Chinese company called I think it was called Zhenhua, which boasts on its website that they work. Their clients are the Chinese intelligence service, the Ministry of State Security, as well as the Chinese military intelligence.
I read this in the Washington Post. Yes, they have 2.4 million individuals were kind of captured there, including one Matt Pottinger, I believe.
Yeah, I heard. I made that list. That doesn't surprise me. I'm sure
it's like the who's who, right?
Others. Yeah, but what they're doing is, I mean, if you think of the ambition of this, they are carefully, assiduously scraping, and they have contracts from the Chinese government to scrape all of the data available about anyone who might have any influence or knowledge that's of use to China in every country on Earth. It doesn't matter how distant. It could be the Faroe Islands, which how many people are going to find that in 10 seconds on the globe? The Faroe Islands, in Greenland, in Pacific Island countries, but the most were for the United States. And what they're collecting is data that they can get through both legal means, but also private data that is not, people don't want their social security numbers, their private banking details, their location at any given moment, private communications. All of this stuff is being harvested, collected for use by China's security apparatus in order to coerce or influence people in government, in parliaments, in Congress, in administrations, in intelligence, in the military, and also in technology companies.
So to me, the way you're describing it is quite simple. If we are aware of any country engaged in an intelligence operation where they're collecting, be it on a government official like Matt Pottinger or any private citizen, the U.S. government's role and responsibility is to protect those people and prevent that form of collection. I mean,
that's it.
20th century, it could have been, somebody coming in and stealing documents from a safe. 21st century, it's data collection.
These are not open forums and platforms for the free exchange of ideas. These are instruments for conducting surveillance, for example, on Chinese students in the United States by their government at home, and then for collecting all the information they need to coerce or influence, target and influence people in every country on Earth.
Two more questions, and then we'll go to our lightning round. I want to hit on students in a second, but first, what about the skeptic who says, hey, doesn't the United States do this against its adversaries and competitors around the world? So, it's just a state actor doing what a state actor does. And therefore, there's nothing wrong with the Chinese doing it because every country engages in this, even Western countries, democratic states. Yeah,
the short answer is no. we don't do anything remotely like this. And to the extent that we conduct intelligence operations for our national security, targeting sources overseas, those are governed by U.S. law and institutions that would make it extremely difficult to imagine the kind of scope and usage of data that China is bringing into play right now.
But isn't it ultimately about a system here, Matt? Because really the problem here is that this is a country governed by a party where you're having a conversation for an article you're writing and you get punched in the face by a government goon at Starbucks. Whereas that shouldn't happen in the United States. If it does, there's a means to prosecute and bring that person to justice. That fundamentally that's the biggest challenge here. It's this system.
it's the nature of the systems couldn't be more different.
So you hit on students, and we'll close out the discussion with this before we get to the lightning round, which I keep on kind of holding out there. But we have a tremendous number of Chinese students in the United States. It gets numbers get bandied about all the time, particularly in our engineering programs and STEM programs at the graduate level, especially. To me, this is a positive thing because we've always benefited from "quote unquote" the brain drain, where it benefits us. Yet at the same time, given where you sit, you have to be careful of the Chinese Communist Party's reach into those students. How do we balance that?
Yeah, it's not easy, but we're making every effort to balance it. Of the more than 400,000 Chinese students that are here, President Trump has taken action to target roughly 1% of that massive number, to target military-affiliated Chinese researchers who are, in some cases, here under false pretenses or even false identities. In other cases, simply here to target technologies that would be useful to China's military advancement or to the repression of their own people. And so we're practicing a little bit of surgery. It's a surgical approach.
And are they going to stay here? I mean, isn't that ultimately that these people who come here, they experience our country, our institutions, our universities, and the freedom that comes with it? Ultimately, they probably want to stay here and be contributing citizens. I mean, isn't that what we've seen in the past in the 20th century?
Yeah, I think the great majority are people that we're glad to have here, and many will stay here and start great businesses. It's that 1% that is really here. They're under contract in many cases they have an obligation to the state. Sometimes they receive money from the state under the understanding that they will bring back everything they know to serve the state back in China.
All right. Well, we're going to have to let you go so quickly. The lightning round, where we ask you your favorite book about President Reagan, favorite speech by President Reagan, and/or favorite quote. You can answer all 3, 2, or just one. What do you got?
Okay. Well, speech. I mean, besides the Westminster speech, the Guildhall speech at the end, close to the end, where he really kind of shows what his secret sauce. He explains what the approach has been all along. And he said, we embarked in this decade on a new post-war strategy, a forward strategy of freedom, a strategy of public candor about the moral and fundamental differences between statism and democracy, but also a strategy of vigorous diplomatic engagement, a policy that rejects both the inevitability of war or the permanence of totalitarian rule, a policy based on realism that seeks not just treaties for treaties' sake, but the recognition and resolution of fundamental differences with our adversaries. There you have it in one sentence, the entire approach. And you see a lot of that instinctively in President Trump's approach as well, that push and pull, the confrontation and conciliation. I think, in terms of books, I read Peggy Noonan's book about character, When Character Was King. I'm actually gradually reading the second volume of Steve Hayward's book. Yeah, it's not only slow going for me because of my job, but because it's so packed with relevant insight that I find myself scribbling and putting little sticky pad notes in there and writing the margins. So I end up spending more time writing than I do reading, but it's a very good read.
2 great book recommendations, Matt. That's amazing. And a fantastic quote from Guildhall. Clearly, not only mattered in the moment it was delivered, but continues to impact you and others thinking today inside the White House. Matt Pottinger, Deputy National Security Advisor, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Okay, thanks for having me.
We hope this conversation has inspired you to share what you've learned with your family and friends, and that you'll join us again for an upcoming event.
And let me offer lesson number one about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.